Satan would rather influence you and turn you from God rather than to possess you in the Spirit. And it's because of that he is able to influence people, even in the church, more than he ought to. Because we see stories of this possessed man, and we think, oh, that's a scary story. Thank God it's just a story. And too often we are not alert that Satan is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, and he wants to separate you from God. He wants to bind you in the chains of slavery to sin and to the carnality of this world. He wants to separate you from God. He wants you to burn in hell. And the reason he wants this is because he hates God. And nothing would hurt God more than to see you go to hell. So while you might not have to worry so much about a demon possession, you do need to worry about who is influencing your life and where you stand with God. This man would be among the tombs and he would cry out and he would cut himself. And I believe that this man, he was desperate for freedom from this evil possession. Now let me share a little spiritual theory with you on the dark side. There seems to be a difference between fallen angels and demons. Too often we equate them as being the same. One characteristic of a fallen angel is that they seem to have their own bodies, while an evil spirit seems to need a body to inhabit. That is why the evil spirits were happy to be sent into pigs. They needed to inhabit something. They needed something to possess. This man had more than one demon, so that together they refer to themselves as legion. A Roman legion was made up of over 12,000 soldiers. Now, whether there were actually 12,000 evil spirits or just a lot of spirits in this man, there were a bunch of them. And this was a serious condition. And I believe that when he was cutting himself, he was actually trying to end his life, but they would not allow it. People who think that they are free in bondage, there are people who think they are free in bondage, and they don't realize it. Let me give a third shot at that. There are people who think they are free, but they are in bondage, and they don't realize it. There we go. People live every day in chains. And those chains take many forms. And you have seen many of those forms. Some are trapped by addiction. That addiction can be a drug addiction. It can be an alcoholic addiction. It can be a food addiction or a lack of food addiction. People can be chained to addiction. And most addictions are destructive, no matter what form they take. Even and especially sexual addiction. Too many guys want to wink and nudge over the golfer, Tiger Woods, all the mistresses in his life. And they admire him for his wealth and his prowess on the golf course. But what you don't understand is he is in chains. And he has allowed himself to be bound by addiction. They live as if they're free, however, they are living on death row. If you do not know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you are on death row to face the eternal second death. An ocean liner leaves New York bound for Liverpool. Its destination has been determined by the proper authorities. Nothing can change it. This is at least a faint picture of sovereignty. On board the liner are scores of passengers. These are not in chains, neither are their activities decreed for them. They are completely free to move about as they will. They eat, they sleep, they play, they lounge on the deck, they read, they talk together as they please. But all the while, the great liner is carrying them steadily onward to their predetermined port. There are people today that are like on ocean liners. They can do whatever they want to, walk about as freely as they want to, and do whatever they want. They can eat, they can play, they can chat, but all the while, their lives are on a predetermined course going toward hell. And until they decide to get off that boat and be saved by Jesus Christ, they will be lost. No one ever thought that the Titanic would ever sink when it launched on its maiden voyage. The unsinkable ship. They thought it was a joke to find out it was sinking. That's impossible. It cannot sink. And there are people today who think that they have a certain amount of years that it is impossible for them to go to hell. And they choose to live their lives as if the boat will go on forever. People have been freed from chains and fall into bondage once again. People have been freed from chains. They've come to find Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. No longer do they need to worry about the sin. No longer are they caught up in worldly matters, things of the flesh. They decide to make Jesus first and foremost in their lives for a while. And then they start to think, well, it wasn't so bad when I had those chains on. Yeah, I sinned, but, to some degree it was kind of fun. They start longing for the lives that they once had. They start drifting away from the Lord. It's not uncommon to seek the comfort of bondage. You say, how can bondage be comfortable? In our minds, we can do a lot of things that don't make sense. The people of Israel had been freed from enslavement. They had been redeemed by God. They had been protected by God, provided for by God. And yet, in Numbers chapter 14, verse 4, when they find themselves facing a dangerous situation, we read that in verse 1, that night all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. There are some of you that are consciously, some of you that have unconsciously in your lives chosen to go back to Egypt when God has set you free. Second Peter chapter 19, or rather, 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19 through 22. Peter replies this, they promise them freedom.